Moving on, let's leave 2-3 lines, and after 2-3 lines, we continue with this. They who have been accustomed to. I hope you have found. They who have been accustomed to the gaudiness and inane phraseology of many modern writers, if they persist in reading this book to its conclusion, they will, no doubt, frequently have to struggle with the feelings of strangeness and awkwardness. Now, they who have been accustomed to the gaudiness and inane phraseology. Inane means something which is extremely silly, something which doesn't have any real meaning or real importance. Now, indirectly, he's making an attack upon the neoclassical principles, upon the subject matter of these neoclassical poets whose work, when they took up the form such as mock epic or these poets who took up such poetic subjects that may not have any real importance, that may not have any real meaning in terms of human life, or in other words, they were to an extent silly. That now he says that a reader who is accustomed to this gaudy phraseology or this inane phraseology might find this book, that is the preface to Lyrical Ballads, a kind of struggle with a kind of feeling of strangeness and awkwardness. Why? Of course, the reason is because Wordsworth's preface and even the 1798 one, which he termed earlier as some sort of advertisement, Wordsworth's preface were in a way a kind of groundbreaking work, a kind of avant-garde work that was just not expected of the poets of those times. That is why when people say he was an iconoclast or a radical or originative, yet he presented ideas that were leading edge. Of course, they were bold in the sense it was presented at an age where it was not expected. Right? So he says that, now I read again, I'm continuing again from the text. And I quote, those who have been accustomed to the gaudiness and inane phraseology of many modern writers, if they persist in reading this book till its conclusion or to its conclusion, they will, no doubt, frequently have to struggle with the feeling of strangeness and awkwardness, primarily for the reason that his work, which is generally regarded as a groundbreaking one, though originative but cutting edge, certainly radical in nature, it might not be easily digestible. It might not be accepted easily. Those who are accustomed to, those who are well versed with, or those who are mostly towards or clearly towards the neoclassical poets, or the kind of poetry that they subsumed, or the kind of poetry that they supplied to the public. So next, we'll leave these remaining lines of this paragraph and let's move further. That is the next paragraph, important one. Now, this is an important paragraph. Let's read it carefully and let's dwell on it more. The principal object, so I'm reading it from here, the principal object then, which I proposed to myself in these poems, was to choose incidents and situations from common life and to relate or describe them throughout, as far as it was possible, in a selection of language really used by men, and at the same time to throw over them a certain colouring of imagination whereby ordinary things should be presented to the mind in an unusual way, and further and above all to make these incidents and situations interesting by tracing in them truly, though not ostentatiously, the primary laws of our nature, chiefly as far as regards the manner in which we associate ideas in a state of excitement. Now, a lot of things have been told. Whatever principles that we regard, poetic principles of Wordsworth, the majority of these principles can be found in this particular passage. Very important one. Be very careful when you're giving it a second reading, third reading, because most of your answers when you'll attempt it, of the question based on preface to Lyrical Ballads, they will have to take up some of the points from this paragraph. So first thing he says is, the principal object in these poems, that is, which are going to be, say, presented in Lyrical Ballads, and this is just a preface, in these poems was to choose incidents and situations from common life. So one is Choose the incidents and situations from common life. This is one of the poetic doctrines that Wordsworth presented, and the very beginning with that a poet ideally should choose the incidents, the situations, and the circumstances of its poetic subject from the common day-to-day life, and to relate or describe them throughout in a selection of language really used by men. Now, not only these incidents, these situations, these circumstances should be normal one, they should belong to the normative part of human life. That is, they should not be something of the extraordinary nature. Now, if you remember, Aristotle said exactly opposite to what Wordsworth is just now saying. Aristotle said that if a tragedy has to take place, or even if we are talking of Aristotle said that if a tragedy has to take place, or even if we are talking of epic, if an epic or tragedy has to take place, it must be about people who should be above average or who should be extraordinarily good, right? And the situations, that is the tragic situation, in order for it to happen, it must not be generalized, if you remember. And we took up that instance of the same classroom, and we said, suppose a student is very upset, and the person commits so and so tragic act. So this becomes not a very general situation. This is an extraordinary situation. Although tragedy would be good as per Mr. Aristotle only if this, the example we took of a student, if the person that we took off an example of, or the tragic character is of extraordinary contemplation, that person is of extraordinary disposition, right? So we mentioned two things as per Mr. Aristotle. One is, if a tragic character has to be made successful, it must be about someone who is above average, or who should not be mediocre, who should not be among common men and women, who should be someone who had been an achiever, someone who has achieved great things in life, right? And second, for a tragedy to happen, it should not be generalized at all. Now, Mr. Wordsworth, that's why we call him radical, and we've used the term iconoclast. Now, Mr. Wordsworth said exactly opposite, exactly contrary to what Aristotle has mentioned in one of the works. And that way, he's also somewhere liberating the poetic subject, not just the poetic subject, the poetic diction, the subject matter, the overall subject matter, and later on when we'll give the reading of this text, even the poetic form. So at multiple levels, what happens is a kind of liberation of this poetic aesthetics that takes place. But at the same time, I'm not saying that he was some sort of an aesthetic libertine. Yep, he has been by critics he has been labeled as a libertine, as an aesthetic libertine. Now, libertine, usually I understand that it's a term referred to someone who is immoral, who has no control over their sexual pleasures. But here it's more like a person who has free thinking, right? Who is not sticking to the rules of ethics and moralities. And similarly here it mentions aesthetic morality, or aesthetic ethics that existed, or aesthetic rules that existed, right? Now let's get back to whatever number of points he makes. First is that the principal object, that is the poetic subject, should be selected from the incidents or situations that should happen in someone's common day-to-day life, and they should be described in as far as possible manner. It should be described in a selection of language. It should be described in a language, or the choice of words or word dictions should be such that it should be really used by men. At the same time, to throw over them a certain coloring of imagination. So Mr. Wordsworth says that I'm not just saying that if you select the principal objects of your poetic subject to be from someone's common life or day-to-day situations and circumstances, so and so forth, and you decidedly, as I said, as I'm giving you one part of the doctrine, and it says that it should be in a language really used by men. I'm not saying that it should be in a conversational language only. I'm not saying it should be a prose line, or for that matter a prosaic one. I'm not saying that it should only be without meter, without form, without poetic poetic technicality. Nothing else should be there. I'm not saying that. Rather, it should be most likely closer to the language used by men, that is conversational one. At the same time, there should be some degree of or some coloring of imagination into which, so that the ordinary things which the mind perceives, the ordinary ways in which the human mind perceives certain things, that should be challenged. Why? How that would be challenged? With the use of certain coloring of imagination. Now, if you recall some of the neoclassical poets and the way they have written the way they have composed their poetic pieces, and if you remember clearly, if they were using the mock epic poem, mock epic technique in their poem, then their emphasis was more on, first, the choice of words, which cannot be loose, which cannot be taken up from the day-to-day language. Second, the subject matter of their poetry cannot be, since it was talking about mock epic, so of course it has to take up people who were put in a situation by which you're trying to create a kind of mockery out of that situation, written in a form which was called epic form, right? So at the level of form, they were never compromising upon what all definitions or what all essential doctrines of how epic is to be written. They were not compromising upon it, the neoclassical poet. And at the level of poetic subject, yes, they were taking up ordinary people, not so ordinary people, but yes, important people and particular important incidents, and they pushed it into this grand framework of how epic should be written, right? So somewhere, if you realize, at the level of form and technicality and meter and all those typical poetic jargons that we have studied in the past classes, they were never ever from the colloquial part or from the simplistic side of human human beings. They were never from the simplistic side or the mellow down side, or which will be less pretentious, something which would not be extravagant, something which would not be showy or glitzy for that matter, right? On the other hand, Wordsworth, in a stark S-T-A-R-K, stark opposition to this, what neoclassicals have said, he says it should be in the language really used by men. So he's saying somewhere that yes, and openly he's stating it, that colloquial language should be used, right? But this colloquial language should be compromised at the level of meter, form, so and so forth, poetic technicality, but not at the level of imagination. Now here comes the buzzword of Mr. Wordsworth. He was very concerned with this word called imagination, and what we see, or what we generally regard as for a layperson's language, what imagination is. Of course, it is somewhere closer to how Wordsworth drew it, but it would be a gross mistake to think of these terms such as imagination, feelings, thoughts, ideas, so and so forth, or meditation or meditative quality. These words which has been used in the preface by Wordsworth, it was too readily accepted even during those times, and even now the readers of Wordsworth poetry, if someone says that what is poetry as per Mr. Wordsworth, they say it was emotion recollected in tranquility, or the sporadic overflow, or the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions. But the problem is they take up these words of thoughts, feelings. But the problem is they take what these words of thoughts, feelings, imagination, meditative quality, ideas, and they're just very randomly accepted. They're too readily accepted. All those conjunctions of thought, feeling, imagination, meditation, they all are very readily accepted, while this is not the case. What Mr. Wordsworth meant for imagination was never in the layperson sense. He meant that poetic passion, when you look at an object and certain certain feelings or certain words or certain thoughts that are evoked, those poetic passions are very different from the passion which arises otherwise. Now, I'd like to make you recall something, and this is particularly for section A. In the very beginning of this preface to lyrical ballads, when we were just discussing the background of the text, if you remember, we talked of, and there was just 5 to 6 students present in that class. I gave them an exercise, and that exercise was look at the pencil that we use, and you have to compose few lines, no matter whatever your language is, in meter. No, not that is not required. Just few words that come to your mind when I say the word pencil. So some people described it objectively, and then I had put it a condition that pencil, the way you're giving the description, it should not be objective at all. What do I mean by this, that it should not be objective or it should be subjective? I meant that when I said pencil, please don't describe that it is a graphite made or a lead piece, an object made of lead or graphite, or it has this sharpness, it is used for writing. No, I am not looking for the description of pencil in the objective sense of the word. You know how you describe things objectively. For example, when I say fan, and you'll objectively describe that there exist 3 blades of a fan, and so forth. It functions by the way of electricity, and then you'll describe about electricity, so on and so forth. So I did not ask for the objective nature of pencil. I said, I'm giving you 1 minute or probably 2 minutes. Look at this pencil and think about all those feelings that come to your mind. And I got, because there was just 6 to 7 students in class, and I got a varied responses. Students said, some of them said, well, it is very much like you can erase off. A pencil allows you to erase off your past mistakes and write your own story, or give you a narration of your own life in your own way. Someone said